Hello and welcome to the Earth Observed podcast, a podcast where I sit down with the founders, the technical leaders, and the minds shaping the future of Earth data, geospatial technology, and atmospheric AI across Europe, North America, and beyond. In each episode, we take a vertical dive into a topic chosen by our guest, giving you a front row seat to the ideas, the tools, and the challenges that enable innovation from space to subsurface and everything in between. Today, I have the pleasure of being joined by Bilal, co-founder of Arteo. Now, Arteo are a fast-moving startup, redefining what's possible in the carbon markets and doing so just as the sector hits a critical inflection point. They're tackling one of the carbon market's most stubborn bottlenecks, risk management, building the first early-stage investment-enabling carbon insurance product powered by a proprietary AI-driven risk engine that gets stronger with every policy. Why? Because without scalable insurance, developers can't secure financing, buyers lack confidence, and investors face unhedged risks. And Arteo is changing that. So far, they have launched the world's first early-stage carbon insurance product covering pre-operations to delivery shortfalls, secured Lloyd's cover holder approval in rapid time, written policies across continents and project types, as well as positioned to serve the $35 billion in mandated demand under the CORSIA 2026 to 2035. Now, look, some of that may be alien to you guys watching today, but in today's episode, we are going to be talking about insuring the future, unlocking capital for carbon markets, and no doubt Bilal has the answers for you there. So, Bilal, thank you so much for joining us today. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you for having me, and looking forward to the conversation.
Absolutely, yep. We've spoken for some time now, and I do actually remember when you first spoke to me about the idea of actually starting Arteo. I think it was a fair bit of time ago now, but it's been really lovely, really great to see it mature into the business it is today. And I'm super excited to see where it is going to go tomorrow. So yeah, I guess, is there any kind of thoughts, any words you want to give before we dive deep into this area of discussion?
Yeah, it's been I think when I first spoke to you, it was a year and a half ago. So it's been a year and a half on this journey. Obviously, as you mentioned, we've now launched the world's first early stage insurance product before the project even starts. So before the first tree is planted, for example. And yeah, I think it's been the journey now in insurance times. I think that's a super fast launch. Within 6 months, we made the risk engine, we launched the product, but maybe in like climate software side, it's not so fast. But I think in insurance benchmarks, it's crazy fast. But yeah, I think it's been the journey. We're happy to share more as well as we continue the conversation.
Absolutely. And I think, you talk about how quickly you moved with the deployment of this product, but do you not think that this type of platform, this type of product does require such pace and such intensity given the problem that you're trying to solve?
Yeah, for sure. So I actually felt the pains of the problem I'm trying to solve, and that's why it was created with this urgency. So in my previous roles, I was part of these transactions that fell through because it was an early stage project with risk, and investors were reluctant to deploy that capital because they thought it was too risky and they wanted some collateral in place. That's really what insurance offers, right? It's like collateral. So I felt this pain, and I know if we could offer early stage insurance, it would straight away unlock quite a lot of money and capital to these projects. So yeah, having felt that pain, I think is really what drove us to be fast and effective with it. Obviously, it's the co-founding team, right? We're like a really good mix of insurance, carbon markets expertise, and financial services, financial modeling. So it's really that whole team that allowed us to be super quick with our launch.
Absolutely. What we're going to do, we're going to dive deeper into some of those pain points as to why Arteo really exists today. We're going to go deeper into your team as well, maybe some of their backgrounds. This kind of mixture, this hybrid of experience that comes together to make it all play beautiful music. But I think before we go into that, I think the people watching today are definitely going to want to learn a little bit more about you and your own journey, and kind of what has led to this point in time, really.
Of course. So I actually study economics and finance, which is very different to what we are talking about today. And my co-founder, actually, I met him at university about 12 years ago, and he studied economics and finance too with me. So you would ask, how the hell did you guys end up with a carbon insurance company? And the answer to that really is I started doing Bloomberg. I joined Bloomberg, I joined the ESG team, helped launch the Bloomberg ESG ratings product, which is quite a cool product. It assessed the environmental, social, and governance factors of these companies. Whereas at the same time, my co-founder was auditing VC funds. So a very different journey, but he was focusing a lot more project financials on climate tech companies, whereas I was doing more ESG assessments for kind of publicly listed companies. And that's what took me to Silvera, which was my next, I guess, employment on record. And that was a really cool experience as well. I joined when it was like 15 people. When I left, it was 200 people within 2 years. It was quite a scaling company, and we got to build the market's first ratings product, assess all kinds of risks in these carbon projects. But I think the market started moving very fast towards early stage and pre-issuance because corporates wanted to buy their own credits. They wanted to source their own credits, lock down their pipelines, secure them at a good cost to them as well. And that's really why I think early stage insurance really helps them, is because they were facing these risks such as delivery risk, which is, I think, is a main barrier. And time again, like I said, they weren't getting that security from project developers. One of the reasons they can't get that security, by the way, is because they actually are unable to provide that. What that means is if you are planting trees, for example, the most simplest use case, you actually don't even own the land a lot of the time. So you're leasing the land maybe from the government or from the community. So you're actually unable to offer that land as collateral, which is what insurance does. Then it comes in as a third party that's providing that collateral. So I knew that if we could launch this, it would allow a lot more transactions to get over the line. And that's what we're seeing now is insurance is basically written in investment contracts to say, if you get this, we will invest in you. And that's why we think we're having such a good impact on the market.
Some fantastic blend of experience there. You've worked for some large organizations, the likes of Bloomberg, working in their ESG function, to working for fast growth startups, scale ups, I guess, as Silvera goes. So, to have that exposure and to have experienced all of these different types of growth spells and movements within larger businesses and smaller businesses, I think, gives you that foresight, that outlook for what could become with Artio. So we've already touched on a few different areas, but I think it's now probably the most appropriate time to jump into Artio as a business. And I think first and foremost, I want to hone in on the area of scaling carbon markets. I think at first, before we talk about the glory and the potential that can come from a company like Artio, I'm keen to understand a bit more about some of the barriers to investment in early stage carbon projects and how insurance can actually help overcome them.
Yeah, of course. So the biggest risk that a corporate or a bank or a financial institution faces when investing in a carbon project is delivery risk. So can this project give me the credits or give me the revenues from the credits that they are forecasting? So it's ultimately all comes down to delivery risk. Now, these projects are super complex and they don't happen overnight. And on the other side of this transaction, buyers aren't super specialists either in this field. They're also new entrants a lot of the time to this market. So there's a fair few partnerships and kind of collaboration that's required to get these projects off the ground and get the investment over the line as well. And I think insurance is one of the main kind of partners in this whole chain of transactions that can really help de-risk those various factors. A simple example, something that insurance knows how to do, it's been doing it for quite a long time, which is super applicable to carbon markets, is political risk insurance. So when a government steps in and says, maybe the land is mine, or the carbon rights are mine, or whatever you created of value is mine. This has been happening in other markets, right? You have mining companies that face this risk. Property rights have this issue as well. So insurance companies know how to de-risk that element. So we can offer that already on carbon projects. But when we look at carbon projects, we look at them as one thing. So when we look at a policy, we cover all risks within this policy. Another example is natural catastrophe. So fires can happen. If you have a conservation project, an afforestation project, even a soil carbon project, you can have these these natural catastrophes happen, like droughts, fires. Again, this is something the insurance industry is used to. They model this on other natural assets for quite a while. So it's something we can bring to carbon markets as well. I think the key here is to not overwhelm the buyer or the developer. The key here is to make it a simple transaction from insurance to say, we can cover all of these risks for you under this one policy and let them worry about their financing or their development.
I want to dive into the data driven risk model side, and what you guys do to build confidence among investors and buyers. But before we go into that area, I just want to understand. We've got the project life cycle here from what I understand. At what point does Artio actually present themselves?
So yeah, a project is quite a long journey to issuing credits and generating revenues. Generally, what happens is you have a handkerchief idea or a concept phase, you can call it. At that point, the project's pretty hard to insure because they actually haven't done the full research into what they want to do. But it could look like if you are creating maybe a biochar project, for example, maybe what you're doing is you've assessed the market, you've spoken to a few farmers that have waste, maybe you've done some research on machines, so you know how much it might cost. That's a concept stage project, but they haven't really started properly thinking about it. So the next stage of that is feasibility, and that's really where we can come in. So feasibility, you assess the economic viability of this project based on the resources that they have. So do they have a commitment from the farmers to give them waste? Do they have a commitment from a bank to give them money if they can meet some milestones, for example? And that's where we can come in and say, okay, we've looked at your planning for this project. We've looked at what resources you have. We are able to offer insurance if you can get capital. So that's really when the funding journey starts for a project. And that's where we come in and say, if you go to market now, you can tell them that you're either insurable or no, obviously by us. Art is willing to back you. Now, when the project goes to market, they'll get funding usually at this point. And that's when the design phase starts. So now they have a proper documentation. They have everything up to standard. They're ready to go. They're ready to register on the registry like a Vera Gold Standard, all of these ones. And once that's happened, then you start issuing credits. But this whole time before during the concept to the issuance, it can take up to 5 years. And that's why these insurance policies are multi-year.
Okay.
So they can be up to 7 years, for example, from our side. And it's quite important for us to look at them as a holistic kind of 7-year kind of policy to say, what are all the things that can go wrong in this? Obviously, the further you are along the journey, the less risk there is, but we usually come in quite early at the feasibility stage. So we have to look at everything.
Yeah. And as part of, the entire process there, I remember me and you speaking a bit about data driven risk modeling, and then how you use data driven risk models to actually build confidence among investors and buyers. I guess I've already said why, because you want to build confidence there, but let's dive a bit deeper into the why, and I guess also the how.
Yeah. So it's quite important. When we first looked at the market, we didn't think the data sets in the market were appropriate for early stage insurance. So to provide this confidence, not to actually just invest in buyers, to also our insurance partners. So currently we have Tokyo Marine, Markel, and Apollo, which are our insurance partners. We also need to give them confidence that we know what we're talking about. So for nature-based projects, what this really means is we can't always be using remote sensing to look at the potential of a land. So if someone's planting trees, we can't just say this is how much biomass is existing in this area. What we have to do is forecast how much is what the potential is, for example. What the potential is in the normal scenario, this is how fast this tree grows in this region. But then what if a drought happens? What if a flood happens? What could that look like all of a sudden? So that's what data-driven approach is all really about, is looking at all these different data points and then coming up with a decision to say, actually, we're comfortable and this is how much we have to charge for this. Similarly, for tech-based projects, I'm not spoken about nature-based projects, but for tech-based, which is a lot of the market is talking about tech-based projects, we need to be reviewing the modeling assumptions behind these projects. So when you're looking at biochar or enhanced rock weathering, there's always a science or uncertainty risk, and we try our best to understand what that science risk is so we can price it. And that's the most important thing is insurance, that you want to be able to price the things most efficiently and effectively. So in order for us to do that, we need to understand the parameters behind their carbon curves, their financial viability, what the political risk is for this project type. And all of this data-driven approach leads us to that outcome is this insurable? If
Yeah.
it is, what's the price?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. We've spoken a little bit about some of the pain points and the how and the why, but I want to understand why insurance is such a critical but often overlooked tool for actually enabling climate solutions there.
I think it's overlooked because it's not sexy.
Yeah, right. Okay.
Creating state-of-the-art hardware that sucks carbon out of the air. Maybe that's why it's less spoken about and
Okay.
doesn't make the headlines. But I think every major technology advancement to this stage has required capital deployment at scale
Yeah.
and risk distribution and risk sharing, which is literally what insurance is about. So you need that to scale these maybe often technologies that do make the headlines. But as a side note, I think for insurance, we often think about insurance when things go wrong. So California is a great example of this. I went to California recently, and all anyone can ever talk about there is fire insurance, and it's because things have gone wrong there in recent years when it comes to fires, right?
Absolutely.
So, and this is why I think insurance should actually be considered at the stage of design planning or like the project finance planning, so it's accounted for, rather than bad things have happened. Can we get insurance for next year now? Because that is too late in most cases then.
Right. Okay. So it's a case of seeing what has happened, and rather than being reactive, it's a case of right. Let's be proactive. But I guess as well, you've even said it yourself. Insurance isn't sexy. So, despite the area of insurance, I'm keen to ask you, how do you make insurance sexy?
I think you become much more proactive. I think you enable things rather than you become an enabler rather than kind of a backstop or just a collateral. So a good example of this is we work very closely with developers. Developers in most cases are not customers, right? The investor or the buyer is our customer.
Right.
But
Yeah.
developers are quite a core part of our whole business model because we work with them to make sure that their project is insurable. If they can use the same models that we use for underwriting purposes, which is basically putting capital aside for them, if they can use that to make the projects more bankable, we are happy to lend them that support because ultimately it means a better project and better climate solutions in general. So I think that's where insurance can actually make headlines become I guess more sexy is it can be at the forefront rather than be in the back end of being part of this whole ecosystem.
Interesting. I would love to give a nod to geospatial, to Earth observation. So that said, I'm interested to know how geospatial AI is actually reshaping carbon markets, particularly in monitoring and risk management, and whether Artio is leveraging this type of technology to, I guess, enhance or offer you a solution.
Yeah, I think it's been a quite positive advancement in remote sensing and kind of geospatial analytics that have helped carbon markets. And I can give a few examples of what I mean by that. So when Jedi was released, for example, and Sentinel-2 were released, I think it was a big deal for
Hmm.
carbon markets. Before that, just if anyone doesn't know what those mean, Sentinel-2 is Sentinel is a constellation. Sentinel-2 is specifically used for biomass monitoring in most cases or land cover, land use changes. But that is a 10-meter resolution satellite, which is quite good for most use cases. It might not be as appropriate for like property assessments because there you need it maybe a bit more. But for biomass, for forest, 10 meters is a really good resolution because before that it was 30-meter. And 30-meter, there's not much change you can assess that effectively, but with 10-meter, it makes a world of a difference. So now, when those two were released, I think it fundamentally changed how biomass was assessed for carbon projects. And what that led to was a lot of higher quality projects, or you were able to challenge the project claims much more effectively as well. So projects weren't just able to say, because what you have to also remember is a lot of these projects are sometimes just 1 hectare big and there's 1,000 of these plots. So if you have like small farms, a 30-meter resolution imagery is not going to cut it in most cases. Even 10 meter might not cut it these days with those, but it did really help in those situations where you will be able to more effectively quantify the changes much more precisely. And another use case I would say more recently that's happened, which I think is still being kind of trialed and figured out how effective it's going to be, but I think it's going to be super effective, is methane assessments. So methane sat released recently, and the super pollutants, they become quite a hot topic in carbon markets as well,
Hmm.
because I think so much attention has been given to carbon. People are forgetting carbon dioxide, people are forgetting about methane and all these different pollutants. But I think that's really going to help as well, because that's kind of short-term fix that we can do straight away. So I think those two have been quite useful. Some of the upcoming ones, like the biomass mission from NASA, I think it's the European Space Agency, possibly. I think that's going to be really helpful as well, because what all of this is really allowing us to do is make really good open source models that everyone has access to. And that just allows for a much better market, to be honest, overall.
And of course, we've got drone data as well, right? How impactful is drone data for underwriting?
So I think drone data is good. It's just expensive. So
Okay.
I think for LiDAR, for example, to be used at scale, carbon prices need to be significantly increased. You can't use LiDAR for quantifying carbon if you're selling your carbon credits for like $20. They need to be upwards of $50, $60. And that's what we're seeing though, is projects that are utilizing LiDAR on their plots are commanding a higher premium because their cost is higher, obviously. What this really helps us for underwriting though is it reduces the science risk I mentioned earlier. All of a sudden you've gone from 10-meter resolution imagery of a 1 hectare plot to super high resolution, like you're looking at a 4K on your big screen, right? So it really reduces that science risk, because now we know that actually this project has done their due diligence, they provided us the information, and we can see the trees grow pretty much in real time if we want.
Right. Okay.
So it reduces the uncertainty for us.
So what you're saying is okay, the cost of lidar behind certain projects could be considered more, or it is more, but actually the quality of the data that is taken or obtained from said assessment is far greater, and actually there's a bit of a trade off there. Is that what you're saying?
For sure. And I think it just comes down to the appetite of the investor. So if a corporate wants to pre-purchase credits, if they want really high quality credits, I think they should be open to paying more, and which I think they are, by the way, from the agreements that we're seeing. I think they can pay more, and that can be integrated. So we're part of quite a few developer forums where they want to include this. They want to be using LiDAR. All developers want a good project. There's no developer out there that's like, I want to make a really bad project and sell that to a corporate, right? So the question just comes down to who's funding it. So if a bank is willing to fund it, I think that would just lead to better outcomes as well.
Sure. And within regards to your risk engine, how is Artio actually integrating this data into it?
So it's quite interlinked, our risk engine. What that means is, for example, when we look at the financial feasibility of a project, we look at very early on before the project starts. Is this project economically viable? Is it feasible? Will it make enough revenue? And all of those kind of questions. But when I say interlink, what that means is, if you think of an enhanced rock weathering project, enhanced rock weathering is you break down this rock, you spread it all over a farm, and it removes carbon when it rains. In a more simple way that I could explain in a second. But that's a normal scenario, right? So it will remove carbon. They will sell the carbon credits. They will make money. It's a financially feasible project. But what we do then is say, okay, what if a drought happened? And we now layer climate modeling on top of it, which is, we use a lot of satellite information and climate models to do that. But now we layer drought on top of it, say actually the carbon removal that it's going to have just decreased by 30% because there's a drought expected in 2 years.
Yeah.
Is it still financially viable? And then what we say is, okay, now this is in a country where maybe there's some geopolitical tensions. What if the government came in and said, I'm going to take 10% of all your carbon credits for my own goals? All of a sudden, again, is this project viable because they've now just reduced their revenues by 10%? So it's all quite interlinked. Our risk engine is able to kind of talk to all of these different pieces of analysis and then spit out, okay, there's a risk from methodology here that this project is just not going to pass because of X, Y, Z. It's insurable for these different risks, and this is what the price would be. We still look at a lot of this holistically, though. So, for example, if a project is failing just one risk, is failing maybe fire risk, for example, but passes everything, we are able to go back to the developer and say, hey, can you like put maybe fire breaks on this section of your project? And then it can become insurable. So we can do that. But yeah, it's more important to say that it's all quite interlinked, the risk of a project.
Yeah. Do you know what's great about these recordings, these episodes, is that not only do people get to hear from the minds behind the industry, but they get a bit of a geography lesson. I think I've probably learnt more in these recordings of Earth Observed than I did across a 5-year period of geography in high school. So I can only thank those for joining me and giving me those lessons there. So look, when it comes to carbon markets as well, there seems to be a lot of talking points around trust and transparency. I've worked with quite a few different businesses in the past few years who are building solutions around this particular area. And I'm keen to get your take on how data transparency and robust risk frameworks strengthen trust in the carbon markets in general.
So when I first started working on the carbon markets, I think I would say the data was super unstructured. A simple example of this is that 5 years ago when I was looking at carbon projects, maybe for about 40-50% of them, you couldn't even find the exact location of them.
Okay.
So where they were happening. And I think a lot has changed since then. Now when we look at carbon projects, there's a floor to quality. There's a minimum requirement that you need to meet to be able to sell credits, which is a very positive change. And that's really because of kind of risk frameworks that have come to market. So you have ICVCM, you have your rating agencies and all these different entities providing quality inputs. So now at least you can say this project is registered in this country, following this methodology, located here. And this is all the documentation it has with it. I would not be able to say the same about 4 or 5 years ago. The data transparency, I think, is improved, but it still needs to go quite a long way. I think people are still a bit more still hesitant to share information that they think is proprietary to them. A perfect example of this is actually soil carbon projects. So we've come a very long way in REDD+ projects and afforestation projects and how they look, how they're structured, what kind of information they're sharing. For soil carbon is still in the early stages, I would say, of kind of on that journey. So more developers, there's a lot of developers that are still hesitant to share information on soil sampling or what the carbon is in certain regions of their plots. So I think we still need to do some more work there on creating that trust in that part of the market. But we have come a long way for sure.
And between now and 5 years ago, very briefly, where do you think we've bridged that gap? Is it through the innovation and the development of artificial intelligence or other?
I wouldn't say it's artificial intelligence exactly, but I think the main thing has been having a general understanding from the market of what is acceptable and what is not acceptable.
Okay.
So I think that honestly, I think the word integrity gets thrown around quite a lot in the market, especially in like public kind of policy spaces. I personally think most of the carbon market has an alignment of what integrity is. It's usually the execution of this that is lacking. So, but that's what's really improved is we've come to that alignment of this is what we think is good quality, and this is what we would just not allow. There is still some work to be done. There's a lot of bad credits in the market from the past that are still available. I think there's still a lot of work to be done in cleaning those out completely. But the new projects are being invested in, which is what we look at. So new project investments and early stage kind of project developments. The quality is increased because they know that if we don't meet these standards, no one's going to buy my credits. So I think it's more of a collective understanding from the market and kind of execution together to say this won't be allowed, this is allowed. So a good example, like I mentioned, is people have been aligning to ICVCM, kind of Corsia, these kind of guidelines where they're open source, people understand them. So they've been able to kind of benchmark that quality.
Yeah. It seems that the carbon markets is quite a regulated industry. Would I be correct in saying that? Do correct me if not.
I think carbon markets is a big word. There's different kinds of carbon markets. There's obviously fully compliance markets, like where you have China's compliance market, where you can use carbon credits as part of the trading system. Then there's voluntary carbon markets where you do based out of your own kind of goodwill, voluntary actions. But then you have the middle ground sometimes, which is half and half. So I think that is also another thing that we try and clarify with people in the markets. Carbon markets as a whole is such a big word. So there's different countries and different journeys on the way to compliance.
Yeah.
So it's important to remember that nuance. The EU is a good example, right? But the EU, they're deciding how many carbon credits to allow into the international targets by 2035 or 2040. But the question that might come to your mind, what happened in the next 10 years? Are we in compliance? Are we in voluntary? Where are we at? So these questions, I think, remain to be answered in most of these countries. It's a blurry line between voluntary and regulated.
Right. Okay. And so, due to the complexity of these compliances or these markets, I would imagine that you guys come in as the superheroes you are and kind of help, I guess, investors meander their way through this noise. Once again, is that correct?
For sure. I think, so we get this question quite a lot about how are you different from a ratings agency, for example, because we do a lot of assessment work, right? Now we do assessment work for underwriting purposes. So it's a completely different kind of product.
Yeah.
But one
Okay.
thing I'd say is that an insurance company wouldn't put capital behind a project if they didn't believe in it or if they didn't believe it would be successful. And indirectly, that also affects quality. So we wouldn't insure a project where we think ultimately it'll have a bad reputation because that just looks bad on everyone. So we do try and assess all kind of ways that we can on a project, but we help developers kind of navigate the market as much as we can in terms of your project is eligible for XYZ. So you can go into that. This is a revenue source for you. So for example, if a project comes in with a financial model where maybe they're lacking in revenues, we can't really give financial advice, but we can say, have you looked at XYZ? Because this, you're applicable for those too. So stuff like that we can give advice on. With buyers, usually by the time they come to us, they've made up their mind. They're like, I'm going to invest in this project. Give me an insurance quotation. So it's a much easier conversation, to be honest.
You mentioned earlier a brief trip that you made to California. Very jealous. That aside, let's go back into the discussion of fire insurance and fire protection. Seems very prominent, everywhere you look nowadays. Across Europe as well. There's been a lot of fires in places like Greece over the years. Um, Tell us a bit about Artio's wildfire risk analysis for Dartmoor and the Brecon Beacons. Both locations hold a very special place in my heart, and no doubt to the many listening. Some brilliant landscapes, some fantastic hikes in and around those areas. But yeah, tell us a bit about the wildfire risk analysis that you've done.
Dartmoor and the Brecon Beacons weren't actually the first analysis that we did. We ended up with that analysis eventually, but the first bit of analysis we did was on Scotland. So I went to school in Glasgow. I thought it was quite kind of personal to me doing analysis there, especially because we just had about, I think, 11,000 hectares burnt in Scotland. I think it's quite crazy that that's a possibility that there can be wildfires in the UK. I don't know if you, but I think that's crazy, but that's the world we
Yeah,
live in.
absolutely.
So when we saw that, we were like, okay, how can we prevent this? And this is what I meant earlier when I said insurance has to be more proactive. So when we have to look at these and being like, can we model this and can we predict them? How did this start? How did this spread? All these things. So that's what we do with fire modeling. We look at where can they ignite and where can it spread. So that's looking at all wind patterns and slopes and all of these different characteristics that geography can have. So that's how we look at fire spread analysis. We did that in Scotland, and then we repeated the same analysis for Dartmoor as well and Brecon Beacons, like you mentioned. But I would say the one thing that we changed during our analysis was we kept doing this wildfire analysis on kind of forest loss or biomass loss. And maybe one thing that could be better is looking at it from a financial perspective, because it doesn't hit home for everyone when you talk about carbon loss. Maybe you're less likely to relate to that, but you're more likely to relate to it if I said, "Oh, we'll suffer £2 million in damages because of this now."
Right.
So
Yeah.
that's another bit of analysis that we added was, okay, if we had to assess maybe the regeneration cost of this, of the Dartmoor based on our analysis, or what would be lost in terms of maybe carbon value, we also did that. We said like X amounts of pounds are at risk because of these fires. I think it's quite important for us to then just navigate that whole process of, okay, we've assessed this now. We know there could be a fire from this region. What can we actually do to stop these things? And one thing that we try and really emphasize is most of these things have to be community led, or you have to work with the people living in that area. In the UK, for example, a lot of fires start because of disposable barbecues. And it's such a simple thing, right? Like all you're doing is having a barbecue with your friends, but it could start a wildfire the next day.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think it's a kind of community led work that you have to do there, where you have to guide people to say, maybe you could do it here or you can't do it in these regions.
Hmm.
I personally think disposable barbecues you should kind of get rid of, but that's maybe a more extreme approach from my end. But I think that it's really that's where you have to give advice as a council or as a county to say, we're in a period of super dryness and these areas are kind of a no-go for barbecues.
What lessons does this study offer for protecting carbon storage, the biodiversity and the heritage landscapes? Because in my opinion, it's a real shame that we have to hone in on kind of the financial burden of this for people to be able to resonate with this type of data. But such is life. Tell us a bit more about what lessons this study offers for protecting the carbon storage, the biodiversity, and ultimately the heritage landscape in question.
I think the metric argument is that you have to talk to the right people, the right language, or talk to different people in their own languages. So if you're talking to someone like a council, maybe, or a government body, you have to talk in financial terms because they would have to take up that cost eventually. Or maybe when you're talking to consumers and people like us who are living in that area, maybe there you maybe are more able to kind of speak to their, I guess, emotional responses and talk about biodiversity and heritage landscapes. So I think that's the biggest lesson learned generally is from our side is that speak people's languages, the way they kind of digest that information.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
in terms of protecting carbon, these heritage sites, it's kind of all things at once you have to implement to fix these things. So you can't pick approaches. The the main thing that we do highlight is like the Dartmoor, for example. The whole of Dartmoor is not at risk, right? Like that's a big area. So you can pinpoint where to allocate resources to in that area using kind of state of the art modeling. And in those areas, you just have to make sure that those community led practices are in place, and there's a fire kind of plan. So there's been a lot of work done in the last couple of years in Scotland on this, is having a fire management plan or a response plan. That's super important. We're also working with some sensor companies on this, on integrating sensors to detect wildfires early, so you can take them out as soon as they kind of show signs. So I think having those plans in place are super important, especially if you want to be more proactive in this space.
Again, so as we come to towards the business end of this discussion today, taking a look at forward guidance there, I'm keen to understand how do you envision RTO's role in shaping a trillion-dollar carbon economy as we see it today?
Yeah, so we believe that for any project type or technology to really reach scale, it needs to be backed by insurance. There's just no way around it. There needs to be a risk distribution and kind of risk sharing. So what we do is we partner with large banks and corporates and carbon funds to help them deploy this capital at a lot bigger scale.
Hmm.
But we also help developers make the projects more bankable before they actually come to market. And that's what we see our role is, making sure projects are more bankable. But investors and corporates and carbon funds, they have the kind of the collateral and the risk sharing mechanisms to deploy at scale. And we think that any project that comes to market in the next 10 years or so needs to have insurance in place if they want to scale.
Sure. Sure. No, that's great. That's great. Well, look, I'd like to thank you for joining myself and speaking about Artio today. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I certainly know a lot more about Artio now than I did before. Do you have any final words that you'd like to share with the audience at all?
Yeah, this has been a really good conversation. Thank you for having me. And I think carbon markets are an emotional market. I think everyone in the carbon market agrees that there's been problems in the past and everyone's working towards them to fix them and make higher quality projects. But I honestly think the next 5 to 10 years are super exciting. There's lots of good quality projects coming to market with our insurance policies. So yeah, stay tuned.
Amazing. Yeah, no, I'm really excited to see how you guys grow and mature to your next phase there. Well, if you have got to this point in the episode, I'd like to thank you for staying, listening, or watching. Until next time, have a wonderful day, and thank you once again. Take care. Hello, and thank you for watching today's episode of Earth Observed, powered by Brecon AI. If you're interested in joining me for an episode of your own to discuss a topic of your choice, do get in contact with me. And of course, if you are looking to scale your team within geospatial, Earth data, or atmospheric AI, please do get in contact. I'd love to understand how I can support you. Until next time, have a great day.